It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. Welcome to the Larry Kudlow Show. Great pleasure to be with you today. And you can hear us live stream on the internet, LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. You can hear us all across the country, around the world, throughout the solar system and the Milky Way. And during the week, please join us. Fox Business Network, fabulous Fox Business Network, FBN. Name of the show is Kudlow. Plays every day, Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. 4 p.m. And if you can't get us at 4 by some reason, just text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. Larry Kudlow Show. Anyway, we have lots to talk about today. I want to begin with our new presidential candidate, Kamala Harris. I don't know really how this works. You've got one president in the White House who everybody says is enfeebled, completely enfeebled, cognitively impaired. So they had to get rid of him and put in Kamala Harris. We still don't know how exactly that happened, but she may be the second president. Then there's a third president, Donald Trump. He's waiting to go. Still, I think the front runner, no matter what the polls say. Kamala may have gotten a little bit of a bump, but I think Mr. Trump is still the front runner. Kamala Harris is your basic San Francisco, California, ultra-liberal left progressive. That's what she is. A big government California socialist. Plain and simple. Don't pull any punches on this one. And actually, in her early days, she's veering to the left already. In the Senate, she was to the left of Bernie Sanders, our famous Democrat socialist. So what you see is what you get. And she endorsed all of the spending blowouts that caused inflation. She's for the Green New Deal, end fracking, end fossil fuels, electric vehicles, jamming it down our throats, even though nobody wants them. She's already talked about some major entitlement expansions. Of course, she wants a student loan cancellation, even though the Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional. She favors Mr. Biden's $5 trillion tax hike to pay for all these new entitlements. I mean, it's a San Francisco radical candidate. As vice president, Ms. Harris cast the decisive vote back in March of 2021, the so-called American Relief Act. That was a $2 trillion spending bill that led to the 9% inflation rate, and if that weren't enough, she also cast the deciding vote for the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. That was a $1.2 trillion spending bill. We're still paying for all that now. $2 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. Enormous borrowing requirements that would push us up to about $50 trillion in publicly held debt, about 120% of gross domestic product. And all that has given us the 20% cumulative increase in the cost of living and the CPI, the level of the CPI. The inflation rate has slowed down because the Fed put the brakes on, but the level of prices is still up 20%. And as a result, average weekly wages have fallen by over 4%. Working folks have got the short end of the stick. Kitchen tables are shrinking. And I don't know how Kamala Harris is going to deal with that on the campaign trail, because former President Trump, of course, will be citing it time and time again. She opposes fracking. She endorsed a nationwide ban on all oil and gas fracking. She's totally hostile to fossil fuels. So, under Kamala Harris administration, expect energy prices to remain very high. They're running about $80, $85 a barrel. During Mr. Trump's term, they were closer to $40, $45 a barrel. A lot of that is permeated throughout the economy, and that's one of the biggest factors between the high cost of living. During her Senate years, she talked about something called environmental justice. Environmental justice. Essentially, that's the Green New Deal. And as I said, she would end gasoline-powered cars. She's a big supporter of electric vehicles, which sends millions of jobs to China. And she's opposed to any drilling, not just drilling of oil and gas or even coal, but no drilling means you can't drill for the rare earths necessary, the rare earth minerals necessary for the batteries that would go into the electric vehicle. So I don't know, we'll all walk around because we can't drive. There won't be enough electricity. And of course, California, with all of its anti-fossil fuel regulations, is constantly dealing with brownouts and blackouts and sky-high electricity prices and sky-high gasoline prices. Well, that's Kamala Harris from San Francisco. Environmental justice, I'm not sure what that means. She links that to racial justice and economic justice and housing justice and education justice. This has a lot to do with her support for major new entitlements. Health entitlements. By the way, she, co-sponsored with Bernie Sanders the bill, Medicare for All, I believe it was called, essentially nationalize, socialize all of our health care. And the price tag for that was scored at $32 trillion. $32 trillion. But she's for entitlements for kids, seniors. Almost everybody gets a new entitlement. Education justice, housing justice. I'll tell you what that is also. That's cancel culture, canceling our traditional culture and our traditional history. She is a strong, strong advocate of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Strong advocate of DEI. And I want to mention here, because we'll get to the Bibi Netanyahu problems with respect to Israel and the lack of support for Israel, but DEI in colleges, universities, schools is the progenitor of this wave of anti-Semitism that we see in these protests, pro-Hamas useful idiots that Prime Minister Netanyahu called them, useful idiots, anti-Semitism. Never prosecuted, I might add, when they were on the college campuses. DEI, Ms. Harris is a big supporter of DEI. The left doesn't like that, but that is what she is. I'm not saying she is a DEI vice president. I'm not saying that. I'm saying she supports DEI. And DEI is the exact opposite of a merit-based system, which is what America was founded on, our great culture and tradition. And she supported Black Lives Matter. And she supported defunding the police during the riots in 2020. And she's the border czar. Only she never really got to the border. She went to El Paso, but El Paso's not smack on the border. And while she was the border czar, First of all, she wanted to defund and end ICE, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Bureau. And as border czar, she never once spoke to the Border Patrol chiefs, Jason Owens or Raul Ortiz. They have said that. She never talked to them. And she said publicly she'd like to get rid of ICE. And she called the ICE people, Immigration and Customs Enforcement people, she called them members of the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, when in fact they're just doing their job. And as I said, $32 trillion to nationalize the healthcare system. And of course, she wants higher income taxes. I mean, her numbers much higher than even Joe Biden. She's talked about 75 or 80% top tax rate. Donald Trump brought it down to 37. I'd like to see it around 25. Ronald Reagan left it at 28, as I recall, back in 1986. So we got ourselves a San Francisco radical, mainstay of the left, and frankly, no affiliation to working folks, middle class, the kind of working folks, middle class coalition of blacks and Hispanics and Asians and whites that Donald Trump is putting together. And I've seen polls. I know there are a lot of polls running around. I get that. And I know that she gets a little bump here with the announcement that she's become the Democratic candidate, and they pushed like a Soviet pushed Joe Biden out. But Trump still has a hefty lead among young people. And his strategy of going after young black men and young Hispanic men is still going to be very effective because Kamala Harris is such an elitist. San Francisco radical, a redistributionist. She's not for growth, she's for redistribution. Take from Peter to give Paul. Punish success. Punish business. You know, she says, I guess, she likes jobs. She just doesn't like the businesses that create jobs. And is already out there railing about how the Trump tax cuts only help the rich. That's just a flat-out lie, which Joe Biden and Democrats have been saying for almost 4 years. Just a flat-out lie. It helped everybody across the board. Middle-income wage earners, in fact, and lower-income wage earners got the biggest percentage increase in income. Under Biden, incomes fell. Under Trump, incomes soared. The big difference. Trump is a growth guy. Tax cuts. Roll back regulations. Limit federal spending. Drill, baby, drill. That's growth. Harris is redistribution. Make the pie smaller. Take from Peter and give it to Paul. It's a big difference. The whole thing's a big difference. What you have here is a left-wing San Francisco big government socialist running against a guy who represents working folks. That's going to decide this election. It's like a California model versus a Florida model on taxes and regulations and spending and fossil fuels. Kamala is the California model. Trump is the Florida model. The question is, who are you going to trust? Blue state socialism or red state capitalism? You know what, folks? I'm putting my chips on red. I'm Kudlow. We'll take a quick break. Be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
Just want to say, we're going to take it up later in the show with National Security Advisor John Bolton, but Bibi Netanyahu gave a fabulous speech to Congress. Fabulous. You can watch it on YouTube if you missed it. And the big, kind of one of the biggest takeaways, we win, they lose. You have to choose between good and evil. And all these Hamas protesters and anti-Semites, Netanyahu called them useful idiots of Iran, by the way, which is, of course, the puppet master. We win, they lose. But the problem here, and this is what I want to mention at the outset, after meeting with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and perhaps even President Donald Trump, but certainly Biden and Harris, and especially Harris, they did not support him. They want a deal to have a permanent ceasefire and somehow return the hostages. We don't know anything about this. We don't know anything about the hostages. Hamas is not telling us. Tragically, so many of the hostages, and were 5 American hostages, I think, many of them have died. But the idea is Netanyahu wants to crush Hamas, finish the job, wipe them out in Gaza, in South Gaza, wherever they may be. It's called de-Hamasification, as in denazification after World War II. But there's no support for it. It's not the language we're hearing. I mean, Kamala Harris basically said, yeah, we're for Israel's right to exist. Thank you, Kamala. But then she went on to worry about, Hamas and Palestinians getting food and casualties and all the rest of that, soft shoe sobbing that goes on. Netanyahu was talking about the difference between good and evil. And he conjoined Israel with the United States, allies and friends. There should be no light between the two, but there is light between the two right now. I was even disappointed by Mr. Trump and his readout, and I thought his presser, he didn't really say what he said before, which is that Israel should completely finish the war against Hamas. But the difference is we win, they lose. The difference between good and evil, Netanyahu was right. I'm not hearing that. We're not giving him the support he needs to crush Hamas and wipe them out. That's the problem. We'll talk about it later in the show. Next up, we're going to do Money in Politics with Joe Concha and Mark Simone.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So let's do a little politics. I kind of let it off with the San Francisco Democrat, ultra-progressive, big government socialism. There she is out there with a little bump in the polls. Let's talk to Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and I got a whole new read here. This is amazing. Progressively worse. Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. Released July 30th. Thursday. In 10 minutes, it's going to be out. Can you pre-order it?
Oh, yeah. It's available on Amazon right now. Wherever you buy books, barnesandnoble.com. Progressively worse. Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. Couldn't be better timed from after everything we've seen over the last month, Larry.
Good, very timely. You got this thing done pretty good. Care about blue-collar workers, protest against new wars, defend free speech, criticize the elites and Wall Street, limits on immigration. I think Mark Simone, Hall of Fame radio host, 710 WOR weekdays, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., I think Mark might have been your daddy's donkey. I think he could have been one of those old donkeys. What do you think about that, Mark Simone? Were you an old Democratic donkey?
No, never. You think I voted for George McGovern?
I was a Democrat out of college, early 20s, but that was a very long time ago. That was a half a century ago. So I don't know. I don't know who these donkeys are, but she ain't a donkey. Can I just ask you, Mark Simone, this FBI director comes out and says Trump wasn't hit by a bullet. Okay, he wasn't hit by a bullet. Really? He wasn't hit by a bullet? And, of course, Trump slammed him. And this is Christopher Wray. And then yesterday, the FBI finally comes out and says, yeah, he was hit by a bullet. This is what's wrong with the deep state. This is exactly what's wrong with the whole crowd in Washington, D.C. This is the FBI trying to start to cover up their mistakes, because they're a big part of this story, along with the Secret Service, Mark Simone. Mark Simone, you think he was hit by a bullet after Dr. Ronnie Jackson examined him carefully and said, yes, of course he was, after we all saw with our own eyes? What do you think? What do you make of this story?
Well, we know he was because the original examining doctors, there's a way they can prove it was a bullet, and Ronnie Jackson confirmed that. But it shows that Ray never talked to the hospital. His people never interviewed those doctors, and they've explained a bullet creates a very straight line, sort of a tunnel, and it pushes the skin in a certain way around the edges of it. And they saw that. Ronnie Jackson looked right at it, saw it too. That's absolute medical confirmation it's a bullet. It just shows Ray never talked to them, so that makes you wonder how thorough he is with everything else in this investigation.
Right. This was, Joe, I had Ronnie Jackson on the TV show, I guess Thursday night, and he was furious because he wrote a long memo about this, as Mark Simone just suggested, after he examined him hours after the bullet hit. But, Joe, the FBI, this is cover-up city. This is the FBI and the Russian hoax. This is the FBI owning the Hunter Biden laptop computer, for a year before the stuff really came out. And this is the FBI who helped to screw up this whole story south of Pittsburgh at Butler, Pennsylvania. That's what this is.
This is the same media that told us, by the way, that the Steele dossier was real. And the FBI,
right.
Obviously, remember James Comey,
yep.
He's the one who helped push that lie, right? And then, he got 2 book deals and got a Showtime series. All these guys get rewarded. John Brennan, Clapper, they're all on cable news now, and you can't tell the difference between them and, like, Keith Olbermann. So whatever, I guess they did their jobs objectively, though, when they were in office, right? Here's the thing. The fact that I'm watching MSNBC last night and Lawrence O'Donnell is still on national television saying that he doesn't believe that Trump was shot. Without any proof whatsoever. The only way glass could have hit Donald Trump's ear is if a bullet hit the teleprompters, and they did not. They were perfectly intact. Snopes did a fact check 48 hours after the assassination attempt to completely debunk that, and yet you still have Christopher Wray out there saying, I don't know, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Does it matter, actually, by the way? I mean, of course he was hit, but the fact that we should all be talking about and the FBI should be concentrating on is how the hell did you allow that 20-year-old kid to outflank all those Secret Service officers, to outflank all those local police and get up on the one roof that had a line of sight to the former president of the United States? And if he doesn't turn his head, which he almost never turns it that much, but that chart was there, if he doesn't turn his head the way he did at the time that he did, he's dead. He wouldn't be here right now. And the fact that we're all kind of like blowing past this like, oh, well, no big deal. But boy, the brass, you know what, on Trump, that he's going back there to that same site to finish the rally.
Yes.
That's, again, the big theme here, guys. Strength versus weakness. COVID takes Biden off the map for a week. You don't see him on camera. Donald Trump's going back to do this rally. Kamala Harris is sitting down with RuPaul's drag queens as her first interview, but won't dare do a press conference. Donald Trump, meanwhile, accessible, takes questions from anybody. It doesn't matter. Strength versus weakness, guys.
Trump tough, I call it. Trump tough. Mark Simone, what do you think about it? It's going back to Butler, Pennsylvania. I don't know exactly when, but he's going back to celebrate the death of that fireman and essentially, look this thing in the eye, which is what he does. He is a strong guy. He's Trump tough.
Well, I know Joe Biden heading back to Atlanta to finish up that debate. But,
is that the same as going back to Butler?
It's not just toughness. It just shows what a brilliant marketer Donald Trump is. Everybody will cover that moment, that rally. And wait to hear what he has to say then. I think he goes after Christopher Wray. I think he exposes this guy. Hey, by the way, there's another big FBI hoax, and they're going to use it all through the campaign. This new FBI report that crime is down dramatically. It's a survey of cities. They left out New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. Yeah, they've left it out of the report. It's a survey of smaller towns. The fact that the media hasn't exposed this is just terrible.
I didn't even see that survey. When did that come out?
2 weeks ago, and it's a quarterly crime report. Usually it's an annual one. There's a quarterly one. The fact that they left out those cities, and there's no way that happened without Ray approving that.
I mean, I think this is the swamp, okay? You're back right smack in the middle of the swamp. And I think, Mark, I think about this. This is a cover-up. The Secret Service, now, I don't know, I'm not blaming the rank and file necessarily, the people out in the field, but the Washington crowd of the CIA and the Secret Service and the FBI and other law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, including the CIA. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy guy because we have proof positive. As Joe said, we've seen this before. They are trying, essentially, if not to cover it up, to just throw as much sand and dirt and mud at it so it's not as apparent. They're failures. And this is why they have to clean house. Now, let me think about it this way. The task force, the congressional task force, Mark, okay, and that's probably a good idea, 7 Republicans, 6 Democrats, so it's bipartisan in effect. But they have to have investigators who are experts, and I'll say investigators and whistleblowers. So they interview everyone that needs to be interviewed, both civilians and the authorities. That's what they have. They cannot take the word of the top brass, and they cannot let the top brass run these investigations, Mark Simone. What do you think of that? That's the key point, I think.
Yeah, but you get the swamp in control right now. There was another statement that Ray made about something like, we're only investigating the shooter himself, and that's it. You want to investigate who he knew, who he was in contact with, but that statement made it sound like they would only concentrate on his acts that day and not look for conspiracy, which is the silliest thing a director could say. And you keep saying failure too. I don't know that it was simply failure. I mean, they left him with way too tiny a detail. They know what size those rallies are. They know they didn't have enough people to cover them. It could be even competence and failure, or it could be something worse than that.
But, Joe, I want them to investigate every single person. Like the head of the Pittsburgh Secret Service needs to be investigated, all right? Needs to be brought in and take notes and interviewed. All the Secret Service people should likewise be interviewed. All the FBI people, all the local police. The local police have been whistleblowers here. I mean, they've been putting out tremendous stuff on the failures of both the FBI and the Secret Service. In other words, every individual agent of both of those organizations needs to be interviewed, and then they should try to interview civilians. You have all these people with their phone pictures showing in real time what was going on. I mean, that's what they need to do. They cannot let the FBI, they cannot let the Secret Service, they cannot let these Washington organizations run this investigation.
I mean, the fact, Larry, that not one person has been fired.
Right.
Not one.
Right.
How's that possible? Like the head of the Secret Service, she was forced to resign because even Democrats were calling on it, but she wasn't fired. Why didn't Joe Biden fire her, immediately? Right? Why hasn't Kamala Harris been talking more about this? Oh, of course, we know why. So I want to know who the site commander was there that day that said, we know that there's an active threat that's out there, but let's just send Trump out there anyway. Who possibly? I'm not at Secret Service. I've never been in law enforcement, but I have logic. And logic says if there's somebody possibly with a gun at an outdoor rally and you don't quite know where he is, then you keep Trump in that tent behind the stage for as long as possible until you find that person, before you eliminate the threat, before you ever put him out there. So to Mark's point, I hope and pray it's just incompetence, because if there's something else going on here, again, why else would you put him out there unless you wanted him to be out there and exposed to a threat? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I just find it amazing that this is the one job these guys have, and somehow they failed so miserably. And again, we're within 1 millimeter of having a completely different conversation about the entire fate of the free world right now if that bullet hits them. And no one's talking about this enough.
Mark Simone, I want you to tease the next segment, which is how is Kamala doing in her first week or so as the Democratic standard bearer? How's she doing, Mark?
Well, it looks like she's doing well, but this is just a sugar high. This is nothing, and she got the worst endorsements you can have. She got Joe Biden. He's the one that told us Kim Cheadle would do a great job. She got the Obamas. These are the two that told us Joe Biden would be great. So,
actually, I think Obama really didn't want to endorse her. I think Obama didn't want to endorse Joe Biden, for that matter. I mean, I think
if you check 2020, he did the same thing. He waited till the very last second before he endorsed Biden. Yeah.
But how is she doing? I mean, my argument is in the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is no friend of Donald Trump's, she's actually moving to the left. In other words, the promise that she would be an old your daddy's donkey, to use Joe's new book. She's not out there. She's talking taxes and entitlements. It's the same old garbage. No fracking. I mean, she's to the left of Joe Biden. What did Trump say? Biden was a phony liberal, and she's a real liberal. That sort of sums it up, I think.
Well, she's like Bernie Madoff. Very impressive until you start looking at the books.
Bernie Madoff. Holy cow.
Until you start investigating, she looks great.
I got to process that. Bernie Madoff now is into the conversation. All right, fellas, let's take a break. Joe Concha's new book is Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys, released on Thursday, July 30th. You can pre-order it right now. Mark Simone, Hall of Fame radio host, 710 WOR, weekdays, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And I'm still Kudlow. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We're talking to Joe Concha, Fox News contributor. His new book, Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. That's out on Thursday. Tuesday. I can't count. And then Hall of Fame radio host Mark Simone, 710 WOR, weekdays, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. The Wall Street Journal, Joe, in her campaign debut, Kamala Harris steers left. Student loan cancellations, new entitlements on health care, child care, family leave, seniors, end assault weapons, override state abortion limits, more progressive culture war, no fracking, higher taxes, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, she veered left right out of the box. The mainstream media will not report that, but that's the reality. What do you think?
We talked about Bernie Madoff before. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders, because Kamala Harris is actually to the left of him, right, as far as being a Democratic socialist. So if you're in Pennsylvania, for example, Kamala Harris is on record saying she wants to ban all fracking. She wants to end the fossil fuel industry. If she somehow wins the presidency, the result will be devastating job losses. So if you're a voter there, how could you possibly vote for this person? And by the way, when she was asked, hey, what happens to all those workers who are going to lose their jobs? She said, oh, well, they can just transition to something else. Sure, that's easy. So if you live in Pennsylvania and you're listening, roll the dice, take your chances. How about Michigan, by the way? She supports government-mandated electric vehicle pushes, right? The end of gas cars within a decade. So that also means massive job losses for auto workers in Michigan. Hey, how about if you live in Arizona or New Mexico? She has obviously said, as borders are, she wants to abolish ICE. She compared border agents to the KKK. She doesn't believe in border wall construction. I mean, 10 million people have entered the country illegally, and that's all under her watch. And, oh, by the way, she wants to give health care to those who are in the country illegally, all while eliminating private health care and making it all government mandated. She supports banning all offshore drilling, Larry. I mean, she supports, let's put it this way, 87% of Americans don't have any student loan debt, but she wants all of us to pay for the other 13% who do have student loan debt. Oh, by the way, we're just going to ignore the Supreme Court. She wants to expand, by the way, the Supreme Court. She wants the end of cash bail laws. She says you should be able to vote without a voter ID.
You know, she and Biden are going to go after the Supreme Court. It's coming up this week. Yep. They probably want to pack the court. They want something called term limits on the court, all because of the court's recent ruling on immunity, for example, for Mr. Trump. But it's not just for Trump; it's for any president, including Joe Biden, who was in retirement. Mark Simone, has Donald Trump pivoted properly yet to this left-winger from San Francisco?
Oh, absolutely, and he's just getting started. Week after week, it's going to get better. She's like Mike Dukakis. It was like a fresh new face, looked great. So you start reading the fine print, then you just didn't want this person. Everything about her, Biden says he's passing the torch to a younger generation. She's 60. She qualifies for the senior discount at a movie theater. So it's not a younger generation.
Who is Willie Horton? Horton? You mentioned Dukakis. I'm thinking Willie Horton.
Trump will use that because Dukakis had let out of some criminals. Willie Horton ended up raping and killing. So it was a horrible story. By the way, it was Al Gore that started the Willie Horton ad, not.
Oh, that's right. During the primaries. Yeah.
So she's going to have a lot of that problem. And, they always compare it to 1968, assassins, riots at the schools, everything's president not seeking re-election. But remember in 68, it then fell to the vice president, Hubert Humphrey, and all he was known for was laughing and giggling and being a jolly guy. And in the end, that didn't work, and they wanted the law and order guy, the tough guy, and that's how Nixon got it.
So Trump's going to be – so that's an interesting point. Although I will say Hubert Humphrey was a little more than that. I mean, he was a serious person, civil rights advocate. But on the other hand, Joe, Concha, how is J.D. Vance doing?
He's doing okay.
Not so good, though.
Well, no, not so good.
Not so good.
The thing is that, okay is not exactly a ringing endorsement, but look, I always thought that Marco Rubio or Glenn Youngkin were the better choices. We talked about that on your TV show. I could see them being president in 4 years. I'm not sure I see that with J.D. Vance. And you see these reports that Trump is kind of having second thoughts about it. I doubt it. That's a leak coming from the other side. But in the end, Larry, no one votes for vice presidents. I mean, you look at the last couple of vice presidents that we've had on the winning side have been George H.W. Bush, right, from Texas, so didn't need that state. Dan Quayle, Indiana, didn't need that state. Let's see, Bill Clinton, Al Gore, didn't need that state. George W. Bush didn't need Wyoming with Dick Cheney. And Barack Obama did not need Delaware with Joe Biden. And Donald Trump did not need Indiana with Mike Pence. So, in other words, I don't think it's the top of the ticket that matters. It's Kamala versus Trump. And if Vance is only doing okay or not so good, I'm not sure it really matters at this point.
Mark, who's going to be Kamala's vice president?
I think she, in the end, goes with Cooper from North Carolina or Mark Kelly from Arizona.
What do you think, Mark?
Choices.
Oh, she likes Cooper. They're close. Supposedly Obama was holding out for something, and he likes Kelly, so maybe he held out to get Kelly the spot. You never know.
Did they give Biden a golden parachute, Mark Simone?
Oh, absolutely. He's got a publishing deal with a ridiculously high advance, a Netflix deal for many millions.
Yeah. I'm going to make a bet here. Joe's book, Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys, will outsell anything Joe Biden writes. How about that? We'll go We're head to head. And Mark Simone, Hall of Fame radio host, 710 WOR. Gentlemen, you're terrific. Thanks very much, folks. We'll take a quick break, come back on the other side. We're going to talk about the Kamala economy.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, everybody. There's so much economic news out there that we're going to spend the next half hour talking about the economy and the Fed. I think it's justified, and also what these candidates are suggesting. So we're going to John Carney, Breitbart News economics editor and co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest, a must-read, and Joe Lavorgna, my dear friend, former chief economist at the White House National Economic Council, and now chief economist at SMBC Nikko Securities. Two experts. Gentlemen, welcome. John Carney, I was reading your piece last night, Depressed Consumers are bad news for Kamala Harris, and you're talking about the Michigan survey. And I want you to walk through this, but I just had one observation. That survey is running about 60 on the index, I went back and looked at it because it came out, about a week ago or 10 days ago. During the Trump years, that survey typically ran around 100. In fact, here is the overall sentiment index for July preliminary, 66.0. Now, a year ago it was 71.5, so it's already down. But during the Trump years, it was around 100. So it's running about 35% less than it was during the Trump years. And you're saying that that's a more accurate indicator than a lot of the macro numbers that we got on GDP and inflation and so forth. Walk us through that. And then I want to get Brother Livornia to weigh in.
Yeah, so one of the things, a lot of Democrats in particular and a lot of analysts have been very frustrated. They say, look, Biden and now Harris should be much further ahead in the polls because the GDP is growing, unemployment is low, there are a lot, inflation has come down, and so they wonder, why aren't they doing better? Well, a lot of these objective measures fail to take into account that as time goes on, people weight things differently. And one of the things that's happened is people aren't really concerned right now about unemployment. It doesn't weigh heavily. We have had many years with a brief interregnum during the pandemic when we locked things down where unemployment has been very low. So that is a low priority for people. What is a high priority is inflation. And one of the greatest things about the Consumer Sentiment Survey is it is able to take into account the fact that people's priorities shift. So people are unhappy with the economy right now, even though unemployment is very low. And the consumer sentiment numbers reflect that. And as you said, they are way down from when Trump was in the presidency. And the reason why this is such bad news for Kamala Harris is that they're way down even from a year ago. They're down actually from the beginning of the year. So even though inflation has come down somewhat, we've seen a continuing degrading in the consumer sentiment numbers, which historically is very bad if you are the incumbent candidate or you are the successor candidate for the incumbent party.
Well, also, just as a follow-up before we get to Joe, Democrats are worse. They have less confidence.
That's right. Democrat confidence in the future. So to be perfectly clear on this, they're actually a little better. This usually happens. There's usually a partisan difference. If your guy is in the White House, you're a little bit happier, and if your guy is out, you're a little less unhappy. But what's happened over the last few months is Democrat confidence has crashed much faster. And in the last month, and this is very interesting, in July, Republican confidence, so when they look at the expectations, so asking people about how they feel the economy will do in the future, Republican confidence actually went up in July, and Democratic confidence went down. So if you just look at the expectation number, there was no change. But within that number, there was a big change. Obviously, that's because Republicans are increasingly confident that we are going to get Joe Biden out of the White House.
Joe Livornia, I have to think some of this poor showing in the consumer confidence is what I call the affordability crisis. Even though the inflation rate has come down, the level of prices has a long tail. It's up 20% over the course of his term, and the level of prices has increased more than the level of, for example, weekly wages or even hourly wages, but especially weekly wages. So
that's right.
It's too expensive. You can't afford the Biden economy.
Well, the cumulative increase in real income or blue-collar wages has been de minimis basically for the last 36, 40 months. So that's certainly a factor. But I want to move away from the GDP comments or story a little bit, sort of what John was getting at, and that is that if you look, Larry, at the Small Business Sentiment Index, that's also been historically very weak, not particularly dynamic or robust. And on the GDP side, the income numbers we did not yet get for the second quarter, those have been running significantly lower than gross domestic product. And if you look at other metrics, qualitative metrics of business activity from the purchasing managers, the manufacturing indice, purchasing and managers index, or the non-manufacturing. Those two are kind of really almost in recessionary territory, similar to what John was saying on the consumer confidence data. So I would say GDP doesn't give you a great picture necessarily of how the economy is performing. And if you really got into the weeds and look at how they put the payroll data together, I think you can make a compelling case that even the jobs, which we get about a week from now, those job gains are probably overstated. So I think all these things, including the price level and the declining standard of living, are factors that are entering into the consumer psyche in a negative way.
Well, Joe, one measure that is often used as an election forecasting tool, I'm thinking of the Ray Fair model of presidential election forecasting, the Yale economist Ray Fair, who was a smart guy. He's a left-of-center guy, but his model is interesting. He used real disposable income. So that's income after taxes, after inflation. That thing, was up 1/10 in June. The last 3 months, only 1.4%. The last 12 months, up only 1%. You'd like to see that up about 3%, frankly.
Yeah, you'd like to see it accelerating.
Right, it's not.
And, your point about affordability, I meant to say, if you look at the first-time home buyer, housing affordability essentially is at an all-time low. It's never been worse. And you've had some nominal income gains, and that reflects in part the fact that rates have had to rise so high because of high inflation. And then the quantitative easing has helped push up home prices. So you've had a lot of wealth, but it hasn't filtered down into the middle and lower incomes as it has in the past. So I think there are a lot of things that the consumers are picking up on, Larry, that suggest some of the macro data, as you said at the outset, are not really reflective of what people really worry about.
Well, you can't take GDP to the supermarket, John Carney, or to the grocery store. What you take with you is your after-tax, after-inflation incomes, and that's done nothing. So I understand it, but I just think the consumer confidence thing is a really good point. Now, what's Kamala Harris going to do, John Carney? I mean, I'm listening to her. I don't really think she's a supply sider, pro-growth supply sider. I think we got ourselves a genuine San Francisco progressive, radical, whatever, big government socialist. I don't think she really believes in Art Laffer's model of the economy.
No, I'm pretty sure she doesn't, Larry. But one of the things that I think is really stunning and a huge challenge for them is the Consumer Sentiment Survey just released early last week, their presidential survey. And this is really interesting because they don't ask the question, who do you intend to vote for? That's really boring and not very helpful. They ask a few different questions, but one of them is, who will be better for your personal finances? And if you look at the numbers, every quintile, so from the bottom 20% to the top 20%, Trump wins in all of those quintiles. Now, this was against Biden, of course, but it applies to Harris as well. So in other words, every group of Americans by income thinks Trump will be better for them. Harris is going to have to try to overcome that. It is very hard to get people to say, and by the way, Trump also wins if you ask who will be better for the broader economy. So it's not like people can say, well, it'll be bad for me, but I'll make a judgment for everybody else. No, Trump wins on the economy. Trump wins on for every quintile of income. So I think that the only strategy she has left will be to try to promise goodies to everyone, and I don't think it will work. I don't imagine that I think Americans know that will be inflationary, and they're tired of the giveaways, and they don't want it anymore.
Well, that's it, Joe Livornia. I think she wants to significantly expand the entitlement state, right? She's for Medicare for all. That had a price tag of $32 trillion. She wants entitlements for kids, for seniors, for various workers. She'll pay people not to work. I think she she had some bill that she was going to pay people earning up to $100,000 some kind of credit or refundable credit. which would be a disincentive to work. And she wants to hike taxes to pay for all this stuff. I mean, I think she was talking in the Senate of a 75 or 80% tax rate, Joe Livornia. You in favor of that?
Larry, they may come as a surprise, but no. I don't even think many Democrats are in favor of those kind of pecuniary tax rates. The problem, though, is that this is occurring. Just those type of broad spending plans or commitments or possibilities are occurring against the backdrop of record large budget deficits to GDP, with unemployment still historically low. And the fear, I think, among many investors, and this, I think, goes against both sides of the political class, is that huge spending commitments from here, already the budget is on an unsustainable trajectory, is that eventually there could be revolt in the bond market. The bond market vigilantes may wake up at some point and start to price in much higher risk premium and push interest rates very high. The problem, of course, with the tax hikes is that the tax hikes will kill capital formation, productivity growth. That'll feed negatively back into wages. So there are some real problems. So I think the market would fear any significant commitment to increase any sort of spending, especially if it's entitlement, because that type of spending effectively becomes permanent.
Well, John Carney, this is all going to come out. I mean, it sort of trickled out a little bit in the first week that she's had. And she gets a little honeymoon bump in the polls, I guess. But this will come out, and I assume that Mr. Trump will, lay this out in spades. I mean, he's starting to. But I think he'll lay this out in spades, and that's got to be the Republican strategy. Let's take a break, fellas. I'm going to bring you back and talk some about these economic numbers. We're talking to John Carney, who was the co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest, Joe Livornia, former NEC chief economist in the White House, and now SMBC Nikko Securities head economist. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
We are talking about the economy. Lots of econ information out in the past week or so. John Carney, Breitbart economics editor and co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest, and Joe Livornia, who's a former chief economist at the White House National Economic Council. He's now chief economist at SMBC Nikko Securities. So, Joe, I'll start with you. Real GDP Q2, 2.8%. So for the first half of the year, 2.1. Nothing to write home about. That's not the worst thing in the world, but I'm sure we can do better. And the inflation rate, the core inflation rate for the first half of the year was 3.3. In the month of June, it was lower than that. Let's see, 2.4%. Right. Both core, the 1.2 for the deflator, the core was 2.4% at an annual rate. Joe, what do you make of that? And do you think the Fed should move? I mean, there was a big rally yesterday in the stock market. Some people say it was because of lower interest rate hopes. But I don't know. I mean, the stock market got crushed on Wednesday, and then it came back on Friday. It's all very strange, volatile trading range. What do you make of this story?
The GDP is okay. 2.1 isn't bad. The problem is that, the 2.1, as I alluded to earlier, may not be the right figure because the income side of the economy, which is based on tax receipts, which are much harder to fudge, has been growing for a time significantly less. We'll get the Q2 data on the income side in a month. So we very well may find that really the run rate is something less than 2%. And even if for some reason it turns out that it is 2%, Larry, we're really doing a tremendous amount of deficit financing to sort of prop up demand. So if you look at the GDP accounts, you'll see a sizable contribution from the federal as well as state and local level. So I don't, again, think the economy is particularly robust.
Yeah, government.
However, the Fed seems...
Government spending up 3.1%. But can I ask you a question, Joe? I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but GDP's got business equipment rising at 11.6% annually. But when you look at the industrial production for capital spending. And, you had a durable goods report out. Non-defense capital goods shipments were flat. They're down almost 1% for the last 3 months, and they're flat for the last year. I still don't understand how this business equipment number was so strong.
Well, that's just one. It has not actually been very strong.
Yeah.
This one quarter. So let's see where it goes. And as you accurately point out, there's some metrics that suggest the game may not certainly be anywhere near as robust.
I mean,
but,
businesses.
Again, if things were so good, you wouldn't see the weakness in both consumer and business confidence. Having said that, the Fed seems bent on cutting rates, and I'm not sure why. I've made the argument for a while the Fed should cut rates because I was looking at the inverted yield curve, inflation expectations, and the models I used said, to me, the Fed was too tight. But for whatever reason, it seems like the Fed now wants to cut more because, cut again from where they were earlier in the year because they think inflation might be moving lower. It's possible. But I think that they should wait. I think that their verbiage seems to have shifted for reasons that isn't entirely clear, Larry. I think they should wait, but right now the market's essentially pricing 100% chance of a September cut.
Well, the markets are always wrong on this. They've been wrong for years. They've been wrong for the last 600 years. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I'm a free market guy, but this Fed funds futures thing. John Carney, I'm sorry we're running out of time. Give me 10 seconds. Should the Fed cut their rate?
I still don't think they will.
I know. You're staying with it. I think you're right. Politically, they shouldn't, but I don't think the case is there. Anyway, gentlemen, you're both terrific. John Carney of Breitbart, Joe Livornia, Nico Securities. I'm Kudlow.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. Bibi Netanyahu gave a stirring, strong speech. We win, they lose. But I don't think he's getting any backup on that. And I want him to clean out Hamas before this is over. I don't think he's getting any backup on that. So let's talk to Ambassador John Bolton, longtime friend of mine, former National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador, and now Chairman of the Foundation for American Security and Freedom. And John's book was The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. John, the difference between good and evil, okay, we win, they lose, that's a Reagan-esque kind of statement. I mean, whatever happened to let's clean out Hamas altogether? I didn't hear anything like that from Biden. I didn't hear anything like that from Harris. And actually, our old boss, I didn't hear it really from him either. So what do you make of this?
Well, I thought Netanyahu really did give a Reaganite kind of speech. He explained what Israel was up to. He cut through the Hamas-Iran propaganda about what's going on in Gaza, and he made it very clear, as Ronald Reagan always did, that the only acceptable outcome is to end the threat against the state of Israel. And by the way, threats basically propped up by Iran, who is also a threat to us. So, I think 35 or more Democrats boycotted the speech. I just think that's bad manners. But the Republicans who showed up gave him a warm response. Then he had to go meet, as you say, with Biden and Harris. I think the Biden meeting was more pressure on Israel to accept this ceasefire, to get hostages out. Everybody wants the hostages out, but what Hamas really wants is relief from getting pounded by Israel. And I think to get it off the TV screens before the election, when Biden was a candidate now for Harris, she made it pretty clear by her demeanor in public with Netanyahu and by some of her remarks after the meeting was over. I really think there's a break in the Democratic Party. I think Harry Truman's going to be turning in his grave. This is the president who was made America the first country to recognize the independence of Israel, but not recognize the Kamala Harris campaign. So this could be a big turning point. I think it's bad news for Israel. And, President Trump was interested in talking about his record from the first term, but he made it clear he wanted the war wrapped up, too, because he thought Israel was getting bad publicity. And it is. Israel is being outdone by Iran and Hamas in the propaganda department. which is stunning when you think about it. They got a lot of help in this country. What they need to do is eliminate the Hamas threat. Israel, innocent civilians will not be safe while there's still a terrorist group on their border. Right.
Eliminate Hamas threat. I'm for that. The phrase de-Hamasification, as in denazification after World War II. The trouble, John, is I looked at these meetings and tried to parse through it. It just doesn't seem like anybody is for wiping out Hamas. I mean, for example, what do you know about this ceasefire deal with hostages? I mean, it sounds like the Bidens and Harris want a permanent ceasefire. I mean, they want the war to end and somehow hostages to come home. We don't know which hostages are still alive, tragically, including the American hostages. I don't think anybody knows that right now. And I don't see support for Israel to essentially finish the job and crush Hamas.
Well, I think you're exactly right on the hostages. It's a tragic situation, but I think Hamas has been lying for months on how many they still have alive. And I think it was use anything they could get to get a ceasefire and get relief from the military pressure Israel was applying. And I think the reason Israel has been strung along on these negotiations is the unbelievable, unprecedented pressure from the Biden White House. Israel's got plenty other things to worry about. Hezbollah in the north, the direct threat from Iran and its increasing nuclear weapons program. Harris said, one of her remarks to the press was, let's get this deal done and end the war and get the hostages back.
Right.
As if, come on, just sit down and sign the deal. Nobody had objection in this country, at least nobody of any quality, when Franklin Roosevelt said our terms for Germany and Japan in World War II were unconditional surrender. That's what we insisted upon. What is wrong with Israel faced with the barbarity of Hamas asking for the same thing? Would Kamala Harris have stood up to Franklin Roosevelt and said, come on, let's get a deal done here and end this war? I would have liked to have seen her done it.
That's a great point. Unconditional surrender. I mean, that's right, but I don't see any support for it. And John, when the word ceasefire, is Biden and or Harris talking about a permanent ceasefire? In other words, stop the war altogether without, finally crushing Hamas?
I think increasingly that's what it does mean. I mean, the negotiations were hung up for a long time with Israel saying, look, we'll have a 2-week or 3-week ceasefire. We get back a certain number of hostages, and then we're back to fighting. Hamas from the beginning has said ceasefire means end of war, Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, which is obviously unacceptable. As I understand the latest iteration of the deal, and I may well not because it's been withheld from the public so far, but there's a ceasefire of about 6 weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks to exchange hostages. Then the ceasefire continues while negotiations on a final deal continue. That's made in heaven for Hamas. I don't understand why Israel would even consider that.
John Bolton, what would a Kamala Harris administration foreign policy look like?
Well, she has so little experience in foreign policy, it could be almost anything. But let's face it, she's a Democrat from California. Let's never forget Jean Kirkpatrick's famous phrase from her wonderful speech at the 1984 Republican convention in support of Ronald Reagan's renomination, when she talked about the San Francisco Democrats who always blame America first.
Right.
I mean, it was a wonderful phrase then, and I think you can probably apply it to Kamala Harris in toto. I would be very worried. It would be like the Biden administration, except potentially much worse than Obama.
I mean, let's stay in the Mideast for a second. The Bidens, I could have said the Obamas, but the Bidens themselves relaxed all the sanctions on Iran, allowed them to produce oil and sell oil, principally to China, get their foreign exchange reserves back up towards $100 billion and finance the war, the Hamas war against Israel and Hezbollah and so forth and Houthis. I mean, is Kamala Harris going to change any of that, or is she going to coddle Iran too?
I think she'll do exactly what the Biden people are doing, or worse. And let's look at the Houthis in Yemen, equipped, armed, trained, financed by Iran. They wouldn't have two rocks to rub together if Iran weren't giving them missiles and drones. They have shut down the Suez Canal, Red Sea shipping passage through which an incredible amount of the world's oil and gas and other cargo had been shipped for years. This is a fundamental violation of a principle of American foreign policy that goes back to the Revolution, freedom of the seas. And what are we doing about it? What the Air Force used to call tank plinking. Every once in a while, we shoot one of their radars, we attack one of the Houthi launching sites. We ought to clean that out. We ought to destroy the supply coming from Iran. We ought to say we do not accept anybody closing that passage for any reason whatever. And we ought to get a coalition of our friends to do it and show we're just simply not going to accept it.
But you don't expect that from a Harris administration.
No, definitely not. I think this is a demonstration of the Democratic Party, something we've known for a long time. It simply doesn't have a functioning national security wing anymore. I worry about the rising tide of isolationism in the Republican Party because if we succumb to that, then there's no major political party that has national security as a top priority, and that means we're in trouble.
Yeah. All right. Amen to that. Folks, that was Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. National Security Advisor, and John's book, The Room Where It Happened, a White House Memoir. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Take a quick break. On the other side of the break, Miranda Devine of the New York Post is going to talk about the evils of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Kudlow. I'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
A very important column by my friend Miranda Devine of the New York Post. Local cops refusing to share info with FBI as agency suffers crisis of confidence with DEI hires. And that's from a damning whistleblower report. And the aforementioned Miranda Devine is here, columnist for the New York Post. Miranda, this is it's a brutal column, but it's a very important column. Diversity, equity, inclusion has infected the FBI of Christopher Wray. I mean, it's infected a lot of things in Washington. But walk us through some of your key points on the FBI story, because now they're on the hot seat regarding the near assassination of President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Hi, Larry. Yes, look, this is a report from a group of current and former very senior FBI agents, and they are so disturbed about the rot in the FBI, the way the culture has become so partisan, politically partisan and incompetent, that they are now doing these in-depth investigations of their own organization and coming out with these damning reports. Last year, it was the DEI hires showing that, there were physically unfit, mentally ill, drug-addicted employees of the FBI who were being recruited and coddled. And now this new report is, if anything, even more worrying and shows that local law enforcement partners, the local cops, the local sheriff's deputies, who are absolutely crucial to the FBI being able to carry out their supposed mission to combat crime and terrorism, they have lost so much trust in the FBI that they are now reluctant to share any information with them. And, of course, that has alarming consequences for national security and for public safety.
I mean, this, among other things, Miranda, this could affect the whole Butler investigation. Because, we're talking about the Secret Service, and obviously there are catastrophic mistakes made there. But this whole thing is really under the jurisdiction of the FBI, Christopher Wray. We may never get to the bottom of this. That's why I keep saying, Speaker Mike Johnson's been on the TV show and other people. They've got to get investigators who go to the rank and file, the people that were there in Butler at the Butler Field in Pennsylvania, and that includes the local law enforcement people who were involved in this and who had information that seemingly was ignored by the Secret Service and the FBI.
Well, and that's par for the course. That's the sort of arrogant, aloof attitude that the FBI has about local law enforcement. And this is what comes out in this report. And I mean, not trusting the FBI to conduct the investigation is very wise. I don't think we can trust the FBI on anything. Mm-hmm. And, Christopher Wray is a liar. He's lied under oath in basically to Congress. He lied the other day several times, and he also lied once quite famously when he told Senator Chuck Grassley that he had business to attend to. That was why he was cutting his oversight questioning short, much to the surprise and chagrin of Senator Grassley. And he said he had business to attend to. He was actually using the private FBI jet to fly off to his holiday home in the Adirondacks. So this is a man who is completely untrustworthy, and he presides over an institution that, created the Russia hoax to use against Donald Trump and to cripple his presidency, and for which Peter Strzok, one of the lead FBI agents in that hoax, has just been awarded $1.2 million by the corrupt DOJ FBI, settling some, doing an out-of-court settlement with him for a case that he would have lost.
Really? So, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, this news just broke this morning.
I did not. Oh, my goodness. I did not know.
Peter Strzok.
Huh. Yeah, that son of a gun.
And Andy McCabe, another one of these vile FBI people, he also got some huge settlement. So these FBI agents know that they can lie, they can interfere with elections, they can hobble dishonestly a president and then get rewarded for it.
Miranda Devine, also you're saying that this DEI virus has infiltrated the training, the FBI Academy for New Agent Training. And there's something of a revolt going on there. But new wellness centers for yoga and meditation instead of teaching trainee agents the value of humility and a higher sense of service. The FBI Academy has become so politicized that at one point a group of conservative students held up handwritten signs displaying the word "stop" in response to the instructor's constant political denigration of Trump and Republicans. This is most disturbing, Miranda Devine.
It really is. And, the FBI used to draw from the ranks of military veterans. And now it eschews those people in favor of recent graduates from Ivy League woke universities, because that's the sort of mentality that they are inculcating into the FBI. And, now this report actually says that the newer FBI agents on these, multi-agency task forces, quote, do not bother to conceal their distaste for disfavored political and religious views, aka conservative or Christian views. Newer FBI special agents identify themselves as woke or liberal and are often openly critical of conservative or Christian values, which really, law enforcement has historically been quite conservative because police and FBI agents deal with the reality of human nature at its worst. And that makes them conservative. I was a police reporter once, and that made me super conservative. So once you know what the real world is like and what real life is like, you can never go back. But so many liberals are just in a bubble and sheltered from the reality of life.
Miranda, I spoke on the TV show. I do my introduction riff, and I talked about DEI, and I talked about how Kamala Harris was such a strong supporter of DEI, and I was not the only conservative commentator to make that point. And then all the lefties came at us, screaming. I never said that she herself was a DEI pick. I don't know anything about that, but I do know.
She is.
Well, perhaps so.
Joe Biden said so. Joe Biden
well, he did,
that.
actually.
I'm going to pick a black woman, and then he picked a black woman.
Well, all right. So, but I didn't even go there. She's a strong supporter of keeping DEI qualifications, not merit, but DEI, essentially affirmative action in extreme. And you're talking about this FBI horror story. I got a figure in the Secret Service. I got a figure in the CIA and other intelligence. We know all about the DEI disease in the colleges and universities. That's a disease, by the way, that has fostered the anti-Semitism against Israel and so forth. I mean, if there's a Kamala presidency, we'll see more of this, not less.
Well, we sure will. And, we see from the Secret Service incompetence and bumbling how the DEI virus has infected that once august, institution that just worried about protecting their politicians and people that they were looking after and did a good job. Now, hopeless, completely hopeless. That bungling that we probably will never get to the bottom of that allowed a 20-year-old with a rifle to get on a roof 150 yards or less from President Trump and almost kill him and kill one of the rally goers. Just incredible. And, with DEI, you are infecting your agency with incompetence.
Yep. Miranda Devine, New York Post, fabulous column and reporting. So important. Thank you, Miranda. Folks, I'm Kudlow. We're going to take a break, and on the other side, we're going to do some stock market work. Wow, there's a story.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. By the way, you can live stream us on the internet. LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. You hear it everywhere, all across the country, around the world, and throughout the solar system and the Milky Way. And during the week, please join us on fabulous Fox Business Network. The name of the show is Kudlow, every day, Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you can't make it at 4, why, text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. Okay, we had a wild and willy stock market. That's how I'm going to describe it. I think it was up 600 or 700 points on Wednesday, or no, down 600 or 700 points on Wednesday, and then up 600 points on Friday. For the week, the Dow was up 300 points. The NASDAQ was down 369. The S&P 500 down 46 points. So we got a lot to talk about. We're going to bring in Dave Bahnsen, Bahnsen Group CEO, founder and manager, and head guru. His latest book is Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. It's a wonderful book. And Jack Barusian, chairman of SmartX Data, all the way from Chicago. All right, gentlemen. David Bahnsen, I skim the Dividend Cafe. I can't say I read every word every day, but I do skim it. Do my best because of my love. And you had a headline there that the stock market is nonpartisan. And you know what? I actually agree with that. I think you got that one right. But I do think the market worries, or the market looks at what the policies of candidates would be, whether they're, lower corporate taxes is better for stocks than higher corporate taxes, just for one example. But at the moment, I don't think the market, or probably anybody else, can figure out this election. So I think you basically got that story right. All right. Does that have anything to do with the volatility we saw this week of, some very bad days and then some very good days? What do you think?
Well, first of all, Larry, I want to thank you that you skim the Dividend Cafe every now and then, because I want to tell you that I skim your show every day on Fox Business as well.
Touche. You can't skim a TV show. You either watch it or not.
This is true. And it is the best show on business television, as you have been for many years.
Thank you.
Look, politics affect policy, and policy affects markets. But to your point, there is no market actor right now that could price into asset prices what is going to happen with something like corporate tax rates. And I would say the same is true if we knew who was going to win the presidency.
Oh.
Because then you still have to figure out who's going to take the Senate, the House. There is so much complexity in the way this goes on. And I have said many times, when we look at the really robust returns the market got during the Obama years, the really robust returns during the Clinton years, and then you had situations where there's been divided government with Reagan and Tip O'Neill, with Clinton and Gingrich, with Obama and Boehner. Markets have done best in those environments. I believe right now it's advantage Trump, but it's going to be a close election. I also believe the Republicans look like they're going to lose most of the Senate races that they could win. I still think they're going to get 51, but I don't think they're going to get 53 or 54. And so when all's said and done, the market volatility this last few weeks, the bond market hasn't moved. Commodities haven't moved.
Right.
The dollar hasn't moved. So I don't think it is political. I think it's mostly NASDAQ valuations that are just experiencing high volatility when you have a bubble.
No, I think that's good. And I do still believe profits are the mother's milk of stocks. And when I go back to the Wednesday sell-off, you had some bad profit reports from some of the big techie companies. And I think that probably really hurt. But then markets came back yesterday. I guess there was other sectors had better profit reports. So that complicated. And I do remember, we'll get to Jack in just a second, but I remember going back many years ago with Reagan. Everybody knew that Reagan was pro-business and wanted to cut taxes. And eventually he did. However, the fact remains he inherited Carter's high inflation recession, and you didn't get a good market from Reagan's first, 1.5 years. Then finally, toward the end of 1982, when Volcker lowered interest rates, the market took off, and it took off. It was up 12-fold during the Reagan years, but it took a while for that to materialize. So people who say, politics explains every move, I agree with you, and I don't agree with that. But the question is, Jack Barusian, what are you thinking about the political impact of the stock market?
Well, I think that there are two different animals right now. I think that what we've experienced over the course of the last couple of weeks in the market is what we would call a strategic asset allocation. We have seen people taking money out of certain sectors, namely the Magnificent Seven, the NASDAQ, which we've seen go down 8.5%. And you saw the Magnificent Seven go down around 10%. The S&P almost textbook corrected 5%. And we saw where the money went. It went into small caps. It went into bonds. It went into commodities. So, we're seeing this rebalancing, and it's taken place at one of the slowest times of the year. That's why it's leaving such a large footprint. But going back to the politics of this all, and look, you're talking to somebody who came, I came politically aware during the dark days of Jimmy Carter, right? And I was one of those young Reagan Republicans in college that realized what was happening. And there's nothing out there that compares to what we're talking about. When we're talking about tax cuts, deregulation, sensible trade policies, these are things that are prosperity creators. I think that we can't discount that, Larry. All right, and I know that the market right now, you might say it's a toss-up, but that's not what the predict markets say. That's not what the markets, here in Chicago are telling you. That's not what the markets in New York are telling you. They're telling you that these markets are going to go up for other reasons. Now, we talk about how well they did during Democratic administrations. Well, remember, the Democrats also debased currency at record paces, and all we saw were these companies basically keeping up, and the profits kept up with it. But the debasement of that currency needs to stop. That's one of the reasons we've seen such a big decoupling between Main Street and Wall Street. Under President Trump, they went up together. And now, under Biden, we're seeing this decoupling. They are going in opposite directions. And that's a primary function of debasement. So, in our minds, and those of us that are trading these markets on a daily basis, what we see happening, what we see in front of us, where the puck is going to lead us to a doubling of the S&P within the next decade.
Wow, doubling. The Kudlow Trust likes that because I'm always long the index. By the way, you talk about small caps. by far the best performer this past week was the Russell 2000, which was up 3.5% for the week. The Dow was flat, up 0.7. The Nas fell 2%. And the S&P 500 fell almost 1%. But the Russell was booming. And in fact, the S&P 600 also is up nearly 2%. So that's true. Dave Bonson, is this a new trend, the small cap story?
Well, look, first of all, I just want to point out, Bill Clinton was a strong dollar president. Okay, Reagan and Clinton, Republican, Democrat, both were not debasing currency. They were strong dollar guys, but I certainly agree that what you've had in the last 25 years is with a Republican administration with Bush and then a Democrat with Obama is a very different outlook on the dollar. And I think that even with the Trump outlook, there's question as to how committed he is to strong dollar. But I think he is. I think he talks in a negotiating kind of way, which I understand. Mm-hmm. But I agree that we want both strong corporate profits that are rooted to a stable currency. That is a necessity for prosperity. But the small cap question, Larry, is one of reversion to the mean. That relationship between small cap and big cap growth was so distorted, it was completely inevitable. The only thing I'd say is the big rally in small cap, and by the way, there's been 2 days in the last 2 weeks where the delta between small cap and NASDAQ, how they performed in one day, was the largest in history. Okay, over 5% move between small cap and NASDAQ twice in one single day in the last 2 weeks. That's how mispriced these things are, how overpriced certain NASDAQ names are and underpriced Russell. The only thing I'd tell you, Larry, is it was not the best performing sector because David Bonson's dividend growth was the best performing sector.
Oh, dividend stocks. Oh. Well, I like
huge reversion to the mean with dividend payers. Yes,
dividend payers. You know that of the dividend payers. Let me just ask. This is definitional. Are these large companies in the main? Are these S&P 500 companies? In other words, when you say dividend payers, who are they? What are they?
Yeah, I mean, in our portfolio, we're agnostic about the capitalization. So we have some small cap names that are dividend growers, but the bulk of these companies that are mature enough to stably grow in dividend are usually larger cap names. But you've had some just monumental moves with some financial companies, with banks, with consumer staples, and then with energy. And energy is a sector that is so solid fundamentally and has the potential of benefiting with some of the political stuff. That's a great story there.
Actually, the bank stocks are up 2.6%, so you're right. It was a nice week. All right, gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break. Folks, we're talking to David Bonson of the Bonson Group and his book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life, and Jack Barusian, chairman of SmartX Data. I'm Kudlow. I'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
We're talking stocks with David Bonson, Bonson Group CIO, founder, managing partner, author of thedividendcafe.com. His book is Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. And Jack Barusian, chairman of SmartX Data. Jack, little rundown of commodities here. I'm seeing weakness across the board. Oil prices down quite a bit. Crude, Texas crude dropped under $80. Brent crude really fell a lot. That's just a little bit over $80. The spread is very narrow there. But also, Dr. Copper is lost 3%. The CRB futures rally, that thing has cooled off quite a bit. And the gold rally has sort of cooled off quite a bit. So commodities look a lot weaker than they did a month ago, Jack. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and you didn't even mention nat gas now being under $2. All of this is actually good for the market. These are fundamentally good things as long as they stay stable. I think the environment needs to be stable. That's the key word. This inflationary pressure is okay. Deflation could be a problem. And I think that's really what we need to pay attention to.
I think the country, can I just interrupt? I think right now the country could use a little deflation. Consumers, households, middle-class wage earners who have lost money because of the Biden inflation. You know, the inflation rate has slowed, but the level of prices is still up 20%. It's a long tail. It's hurting everybody. What would be wrong with a little bit of deflation?
Well, we're starting to see it. Look at real estate. I mean, real estate has got three legs. It's got existing home sales, new home sales, and commercial real estate. Two of the three of those are showing strains. So, there are things underneath that are bubbling under the surface that tells us that we're going to see a correction, a reversion to the mean. But the reality is that, right, and that's going to be painful. Let's face it, it's not an easy thing to go through. But disinflationary pressure in and of itself is something that we can live with. Yeah. When you start to see deflation, the problem with that, Larry, and you and I know this, is that we start to see havoc with inventories. And it really starts to play into the problems of the supply chain, and we have to be very careful about that. And that's when we can start to see things seize up. But disinflationary pressure is precisely what the Fed wants and what the economy would need in order for it to continue doing what it's doing.
Well, it's also interesting, as David Bonson pointed out, the bond market really hasn't moved. I mean, it's the 10 years in a range, call it 420 to 475 or 420 to 450. 2-year notes a little softer. I think the market expects the Fed to cut their target rate. I don't know that that's going to happen or not. But Dave Bunsen, let's. I know you're a big advocate of Bitcoin and crypto, right? So I want you to meet Donald Trump, who has now become the advocate of crypto, Bitcoin and crypto. And actually his running mate, J.D. Vance, is an even bigger advocate of crypto currencies. What do you make of that?
I think that they're running for president of the United States, and you want every vote you can get. And if you got to go – look, my anti-crypto stance is not that I want government regulating it per se. And that's what Trump means by being pro-crypto, is he would like to have a friendlier market disposition. I assure you that David Bonson's view of this is going to play out without the help of the government. People have a very funny way of not being tolerant of pyramid schemes and Ponzi schemes and grift and corruption forever. I don't think that this is going to last forever, but along the way, I'm all for speculators making money and losing money as long as they bear the risk. And to the extent that right now people can come up with a theory of the case as to how it is becoming a substitute medium of exchange when it goes up and down $20,000 every couple of weeks, I would love to understand it.
Every couple hours.
I'm with Trump and Vance on it, though.
Every
I don't
couple
think
hours.
we need a whole bunch. Exactly.
So
I don't think we need a lot of regulation.
Bitcoin, $67,450, up 59% on the year to date, 59%. Gotta love that. I think, Jack Brujan, I basically agree with what Dave Bonson just said, but I think what Trump really opposes is central bank digital currency. He does not want the Fed to run the world. That's what he's really saying.
No, I agree with that 100%. And as a matter of fact, I think that David is spot on with his analysis. I think, either it's going to go to $1 million or it can go down to zero. I don't know. I honestly don't care. I do think that the technology behind it is important. I think Bitcoin is on that blockchain technology, which can be used for a lot of different things. Keeping and maintaining the provenance of data, for example, is essential. And there are things like that we can use it for. It's a great tool. But other than that, I don't see the future.
Thank you, gentlemen. David Bonson and Jack Barusian. Terrific discussion. Folks, stick around. Money and Politics next up with Liz Peek and Steve Moore. I'm Kudlow. Be right back.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to talk some money and politics with Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist. Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline, WABC radio host of More Money, playing on most of these same stations right after this show. Liz Peek, I go to you. Who is the real Kamala Harris? Bernie Sanders with lipstick. God, I love that. The sexual innuendos are awesome on that point. And by the way, it's a brilliant piece, Liz. Really, it's I'm going to put that in certainly your top 10, maybe your top 5 all-time pieces. But Bernie Sanders with lipstick. What were you getting at? What were you thinking, Liz Peek?
Well, first of all, let's remember that in 2020, Bernie Sanders was the front runner for the Democratic nomination. And basically, the party elders, if you will, the politicians running the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi et al., stepped in and made sure he wasn't the candidate. Why was that? He was considered too left-wing to appeal to the average voter. The same is absolutely true with Kamala Harris, and they are doing everything possible to burnish her look, if you will, kind of erase all her past left-wing positions. But they're not going to be able to do it because there are just too many people out there who are saying, yeah, she really was the border czar. And yeah, she really was for Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. And she wants to ban fracking and she doesn't like offshore drilling. And you can come up with like 100 things that Kamala Harris has embraced or dismissed in the past that make her unelectable on policy, Larry. That's the point. And I kind of wish Donald Trump would just go to policy, stop calling her names. Let's get away from all the, Trumpisms that he thinks his followers like. Let's talk about where she would take this country, because I really think people are going to reject her vision.
Well, I think you're dead right. And he's getting there, but of course, his Trumpisms, that's just part of his DNA. He can't help himself.
Yeah, I know.
But Steve Moore, I mean, one of my favorite ones, John Carney's piece for Breitbart, Kamalaflation. She cast the deciding vote for 2 of your favorite pieces of legislation. One was the American Rescue Act of 2021. That was $1.9 trillion that launched the 9% inflation. And the other was the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act in 22, which was about $1.2 trillion. I mean, I think Kamalaflation, she's in the same box as Joe Biden, as Liz is suggesting. And I don't see, Steve Moore, how she gets out of that box.
Yeah, I think, by the way, I agree. I thought Liz's piece was fantastic. I love that piece,
Thank
Liz.
you.
And I don't have a lot to improve on what you just said. I'll just make a couple of comments. One is that one of the things that surprised me, look, Democrats know that she's not a very good candidate. They know that. But they were stuck with her because she was the VP and there was nobody else they could really tap. And so they're trying to use your phrase, they're trying to put lipstick on this pig. And what's really interesting to me is if I were the Democratic, consultants, I would tell Kamala, try to distance yourself from Biden a little bit, because his policies are unpopular and they were a failure. And most Americans know that. Instead, she's completely wrapped her arms around the entire – she's bragging about the fact that she supported all of these policies. And so I think that is a millstone around her neck because they're not popular policies. You got, 65% of Americans say the economy is fair or poor. And so I think our job as kind of analysts, and you do a great job of this, Larry, on your show, you've been doing a great job of it, is just to point out this is what she stands for. They are trying to kind of the kind of new Kamala Harris who's renouncing, I was never – there's borders are. I was never for ending fracking. I'm not for single-payer health care. All of the things that she has endorsed, she's now renouncing.
I wasn't the border czar. Yes, right. You were.
That one, by the way,
I'm sorry, darling. You were the border czar. Okay.
Well, the funny piece where they said, how dare the Republicans call her the border czar? They called her the border czar 10 times in their newspaper.
Yes, of course.
I know. Isn't that astonishing? They just say this is not a Men in Black world where you kind of punch a little device and everyone loses their collective memory. I really don't know how they are kind of going. I don't understand that. I don't understand how they just deny what's obviously out there And it's not just that, it's on many topics.
Well,
like banning fracking, you know. Yes. Oh no, she isn't banning fracking. Well, if you want to win Pennsylvania, that's a pretty tough place to be, right?
What's so interesting here on this, she and others have praised Joe Biden. I mean, she made a speech praising Joe Biden, right? As he pulled out. He's one of the greatest presidents of all time. He's probably as good or better president than George Washington, as we all know. Okay, right. No, I happen to have been around in those days, and he wasn't that great a president. Yeah, but the point is, I want to make is, if he's such a great president, and if in fact he had all the energy that Kamala has talked about for many, many months, why did they dump him? Okay, and I still don't really understand how it happened. You know, Liz, I mean, in other words, this was like a Soviet communist-style putsch is what happened. All right, one day he's running the country, the next day he's gone. Okay, and you may not see him again for the next 6 months. But the point I'm making, what happened here? Why was this? Was it just all about the polls? Was that the whole idea? Did the Republican National Convention, which was so good and unified, and with Trump leading the charge of the great speech, that knocked him out? In other words, how did this happen? That's what he didn't tell us in his speech, whenever that was, Wednesday night. That's for sure. What do you think, Liz Peek?
Oh, I think that the Democrats really were watching the polling very carefully, and after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life and the incredible unity we saw at that convention and the powerful messages about Afghanistan and about the economy and so forth, I think Democrats absolutely freaked out and realized it wasn't just that they were going to lose the White House, they were going to lose the Senate and also not retake the House. So that's when Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, the people who really care about Congress and understand that that's just as important as winning the Oval Office, stepped in. I think they went to him, and we know this is true. Schumer sat down with him. Nancy had a long conversation with him. And I assume it was a combination of carrots and sticks. If you decline to run again, we will do this for you. We'll protect Hunter. And if you don't, as Politico reported, it's either the easy way or the hard way, and the hard way was we really will invoke the 25th Amendment, although I actually think that was an absurd proposition because the person who has to lead that charge is the vice president. Right. Kamala Harris had nothing to gain, I don't think, by doing that because either way, she was running for she was going to be president if Biden won, and she was vice president because he's not lasting 4 more years in a position to run the country. And if he stepped aside, she'd be the candidate. So I really think it would have been a stretch to think that she was going to do that. But that's, I think, what they threatened. But,
Steve, did they organize a golden parachute for him, a big book contract or some kind of stupid teaching position or some kind of phony, commentator on MSNBC? Was there a golden parachute, you think?
Not that.
Wait, do you think that being an MSNBC commentator is a prize?
Well, wait a minute. He can't comment.
Being able to go on the Kudlow show, that is a prize.
Well, of course, he's such a good talker these days.
Yeah,
He'd be terrific on TV. Maybe we'll give him a radio show and pay him $10 million.
Well, I think here's the thing about how this whole thing was handled. First of all, it is now laughable that the Democrats call themselves the Democracy Party because it's clear the last 2 elections they basically handpicked who was going to be the nominee, and so they are the last thing from the Democracy Party. Second of all, I think Kamala has a problem. It just lied to the American people. She was the one who said just 2 weeks ago he's in great health. He's just fine. There's no problem with him. Yeah. So look, that's just a lie, and to say that in front of the American people, which we all know, know what we saw with our own 2 eyes. I think that's the problem for her. I mean, I find her to be a kind of puzzling character. I mean, she is attractive. She's got a cute smile. She's a woman, and that's an advantage running against Trump. But I can't even. She just seems to flip flop on everything. She seems to not even. I don't know if she's a liberal or what she is. She changes her position every 3 months.
Well, the Wall Street Journal editorial on it was that right at the beginning, she said Kamala leans left. I mean, there she is talking about big entitlements, high taxes, no fracking. She didn't pull any punches. I mean, I haven't seen her try to really. I mean, the border czar thing was a stupid. I mean, everybody knows she was the border czar. And then what came next is that she believes that illegal immigrants, did not break the law. She didn't talk to any of the customs leaders, the chiefs of the customs. She wants to defund ICE. I mean, she's kept that drumbeat up. Go ahead.
I guarantee you, though, in the weeks ahead, you're going to see a new Kamala Harris. There's no doubt about it. She's going to run away from those positions, which are incredibly unpopular. No, I don't really believe that. I believe, she's going to run as a moderate, and it's going to be tough.
But she's going to endorse the Laffer curve. You're going to say she's going to come out and endorse the Laffer curve.
But let's consider what she's done so far. What she's done so far is meet with Netanyahu and then come out and give a speech basically blistering Netanyahu.
Yes.
So I think that's not exactly
good point, Liz. Very good point.
Right?
Yes, 100%.
What else did she do? She skipped Netanyahu's speech to go to a black sorority event in the Midwest. An event, by the way, which went on for 4 days. So pretending that you had a scheduling problem, they could have rescheduled her and she could have acted presidential, presiding over the Senate, which she should have done. And then she appeared on RuPaul's drag, blah, blah, but whatever that is, which, again, is sort of an homage to wokeness and making sure that the LGBTQ community thinks she's really involved with them. So I don't think at this point she has not pivoted toward mainstream America. That's why she's talking Mark Kelly, Andy Bashar, people who are sort of more mainstream.
Which won't matter.
Vice president.
Which won't matter.
Probably not.
Won't matter. Never matters. People don't vote for the vice president. She is a San Francisco Democrat. I mean, and all the glory that goes with that. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about Trump, and I also want to talk about J.D. Vance. How's he doing? Liz Peek and Steve Moore. I'm Kudlow. Be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking money and politics with Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline, WABC radio host, More Money. Steve Moore, Donald Trump has so far run the growthiest campaign in memory. From the convention speech was terrific. He's been great on the stump, hammering away. Tax cuts, deregulation, drill baby, and he uses the word growth a lot, and I think that's terrific. J.D. Vance, not so much. And I asked you this on the TV show. J.D. Vance, who has, by the way, many assets, don't get me wrong, and I love his up from poverty and his success in Yale Law School and patriotism with the Marines and so forth, but he hasn't used the word tax cut yet. And he hasn't used the word deregulation yet. And I don't think that's good. Now, I know there's a rescue mission out there because I talked to some very, very, very senior people in the campaign. But he hasn't done it yet. I'm just surprised at that. He's not touting growth the way Trump is touting growth.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think, as I said on your show, I think you and I and Arthur Laffer have to kind of sit down with him and just kind of explain the supply side model. But I agree. I'd like to see him talk more about economic growth. By the way, I misspoke on your TV show the other day. I said that he voted for the Trump tax cut.
Yeah, he wasn't.
He was not in the Senate
That's
at that
correct.
time. But he would have. He would have. There's no doubt in my mind if he'd been there, he would have. But I'm a little concerned about this kind of national conservatism message that's out there right now, which is tax cuts we don't need to be the tax cut party. We need to move beyond Reaganism. And I view Trumpism as an extension of Reaganism, not a replacement.
Yes. No, 100%. And the thing is, Liz, I don't quarrel with JD's, pro-family, pro-child policies. I think that's very good. And this little debate about calling Democrats cat ladies, I don't know. I think he burned them a little bit there because Democrats are not the party of the family anymore. And all this woke DEI stuff runs counter to that. But, the Trump tax cuts had doubled the child tax credit, okay? And that's going to be up for grabs at the end of 2025. That's going to be part of the debate next year in Congress, in the House and Senate. But I don't want to keep layering on because I think all middle and lower income people want lower tax rates as well as a family tax credit or a child tax credit. And I think J.D. Vance needs to understand that. You can have both, and we should have both, but it isn't one or the other. I think this national conservatism thing Steve was talking about, and we saw this with the Reformicons years ago at the National Review. Remember that? It's in a sense, it's a false argument, Liz. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things. One, J.D. Vance is pretty young, and I think he doesn't maybe understand what, in other words, he's grown up in a period where people mostly embrace bigger and bigger government, where people look to government to solve all of our problems, but where, and also where private enterprise to the likes of a lot of people his age got us into big, big trouble and caused a gigantic recession not that long ago. So I think he is on the learning curve, if you will, of what can really make the economy hum. His anti-corporatism we talked about last week, I think it's an issue. And I think that, as Steve said last week, you don't really have jobs without employers. And you can't really constantly bash big American corporations, which lead the world in so many different areas and which we should be not just applauding, but also enabling with lower taxes, with lower regulations, et cetera, which, by the way, some of this he's got to figure out because of his affiliations in the tech industry. If you look at what's going on in tech right now, they are gravitating to Donald Trump. Why? Yeah. Because their industry is under massive assault, something that's rarely talked about by the Joe Biden administration, whether it's Lina Khan trying to break up companies, people trying to figure out that Google really shouldn't dominate search because, that's anti-competitive, et cetera. These guys, and also in terms of tax policy, they really are out to get big tech. So I would think that J.D. Vance would begin to kind of say, well, wait a minute, aren't these companies actually good for America? Aren't they really providing leadership and jobs and everything? I think the answer is yes.
J.D. Vance at one point praised Lina Khan, which I think was a huge mistake.
That freaks me out because she is like the devil incarnate in terms of she's after big company combinations, little company. She has no idea what she's doing, Larry. She's incredibly young, and she made her strike by thinking Amazon was the evil company that we all had to kind of dismantle. Well, who doesn't rely on Amazon these days for their life? I mean,
Steve Moore,
dangerous stuff.
Steve Moore, if you're anti-corporate, you're anti-business. See, that lurking behind this idea that big corporations are bad, people who have that view are generally anti-all business. And that's certainly where the Joe Biden Democrats are, and that's where Kamala Harris is. They don't like business, period, full stop. And one last point. Yeah. Small businesses, many, many, many small businesses do a lot of business with large corporations.
Of course.
Right. They all sort of go together. And I don't think JD understands that.
Yeah. And also remember when you and I first sat down with Donald Trump, what was that, a little over 8 years ago, and kind of went over the economy a bit. Remember, we showed him the chart of the fact that the United States had the highest business corporate tax rate in the world, and the rest of the world was 20 percentage points lower, and Trump got it immediately. Remember, he's like, this doesn't work. And so we need to explain to J.D. Vance that if you raise the corporate tax rate, you're going to put American company. You're going to benefit China. You're going to benefit Japan, Europe. That's not putting America first. So that is a key point. And also, it is so important that we continue to be the world leader in technology. I mean, Liz is so right. We've dominated that industry. We dominated the internet age. Now let's dominate the artificial intelligence and robotics age.
I think he'll get it. But we might have to give him some help. Okay. Liz Peek, thank you very much for giving all of us help. Great column you wrote there. Steve Moore, WABC Radio, host of More Money, following this show on many of these same stations. I'm Kudlow. We'll see you next weekend. Thanks, everybody.